Next, I'll add some bushes behind the foreground trees. I'll create a new layer beneath the mound group and name it Bushes BG. Then I'll use the fan dabs nozzle with the linear size P brush to paint behind the trees. I'll enable Preserve Transparency and Stroke Attributes and set it to Multiply. Then I'll paint over a few spots to darken the shadows, especially near the base of the bushes. I'll toggle back to the main color. Next, I'll use the Digital Airbrush G with the Color Merge mode to tint the bushes a sky blue. I'll add a hint of purplish hue to it. And then I'll switch to the Linear Size P Color Brush, toggle to my additional color, and add some lighter snow to create frost. I'll toggle back to the main color. Now let's add some finer branches to the foreground trees. I'll do this in 2 phases. First, I'll create 2 new layers above the trees, called Branches Fine, and above that, Branches Mid. On the Branches Mid layer, I'll select the Cylinder Pen and the Snowy Branches Gradient. This will create branches that already have shading applied to them. You can create your own custom gradients for other types of scenes. Tilting the pen will broaden your strokes, so try to keep the pen upright. And don't move it too fast, otherwise your branches will look like this. Use a 2-pixel brush with tapered pen pressure and overlap branches to add realism to the left tree. Try to stay mostly within the boundaries of your sketch. I'm extending the branches from where I left off and trying to make the tips of the branches finer while adding some detail. Hide the other trees so you can better see where the branches overlap. When you are finished, select the tree's FG layer and enable Preserve Transparency. Then use the sponge brush with the settings at their defaults to make the left tree lighter at the top using a reddish brown from the HSY gamut. Repeat this for the Branches Mid layer, making the bottom of those branches darker like the base of the trunks. I'll disable Preserve Transparency, and on the Branches Fine layer, I'll use the Linear Size P Angle B color brush with the Far Twigs nozzle. For my additional color, I'll select brown colors that match my tree, and by tilting my pen, I can change the angle of the branches to fan them out radially from the tree trunks. Rotating your page may help you draw more easily. I'll apply some to the left tree with a large brush and varied pen pressure. I'll change to a sky blue and add in some of that as frost shadows. Then I'll go over the top with a lighter snow color. I'll enable Preserve Transparency and add a bit of those frost colors over the Branches Mid layer as well. Now we have something that looks like a detailed tree without a lot of effort. Be sure that your large branches don't just end abruptly. Disable Preserve Transparency and shave them down with the eraser, or extend them so they blend in naturally. You may want to prune some of the finer branches as well to make the canopy slightly irregular, and also to make the trunks look like they're in front of some of the finer branches. Using Select Layer Content on the Trunks layer can help you isolate only those areas. Deselect, and you'll need to repeat this for the remaining trees. Create separate layers for each layer of branches so they overlap correctly. It may help to group the trees into their own groups. Just like when we painted the trunks, it's important to take your time with these branches to make them look natural. I've had a lot of practice painting branches, so if yours aren't turning out right, clear the layer and try again. It may help to just practice drawing a single branch over and over if you need to get the technique down. I'll also mention that you can calibrate your pen pressure to make it easier for you to get a range of thick and thin lines. The number one thing that is going to hold your tree back is that the branches are too uniform and do not taper. The second is that you did not paint enough branches. It's tedious, I know. I had to do this entire painting twice. But if you can get in the mood to paint branches, it can feel quite satisfying. Ensure that you follow all the steps on all 3 trees. They should look like the same type of tree. We will separate them from each other visually in just a bit. After adding all the finer branches, add a highlight side to the trunks by enabling preserve transparency and painting with the smooth palette knife and a lighter brown color. Add one more level of brightness if it doesn't stand out enough. On the shadow side, add a bit of slightly desaturated, slightly darkened sky blue reflected onto the trunks. Now hide the smaller branches and use one of the darker trunk colors to add some cast shadows onto a few of the larger branches where they overlap or intersect. You can paint along the side opposite the light source a bit too. Then disable preserve transparency and make selections of each tree group. And on a multiply layer at the top of each group, use a large digital airbrush to add some brown color to make the canopies look like they're a spherical form that is darker on the right side. Be sure this is not darker than the darkest color of the trunks. Viewing this in grayscale will really show you how effective this is, not only for shaping the trees, but for separating them from each other. I'll name these layers Shadow. Next, I'll add another new layer at the top of each tree group for a bit more frost on the canopies. I'll make selections of each group and use the linear size P angle B color brush with the far twigs nozzle and the snow color from the ground as my additional color. Make sure to follow the directions the branches are pointing and paint as if you're highlighting a sphere. The highlight should be concentrated nearest the light and radiate outward. Again, viewing this in grayscale may make it easier to see the forms. Add a tiny bit of that light color on the shadow edges. This will be reflected light that we will tint. Deselect, switch back to your main color, and use the digital airbrush with preserve transparency to tint the frost a bit in the shadow areas with a desaturated sky blue color. Now let's fill in behind the foreground trees with some frosted trees that are less distinct. I'll disable preserve transparency. Then I'll create a new layer beneath the bush's BG layer called BG Fill. And I will use a large linear size P angle B brush with stroke attributes disabled and the far twigs nozzle. I'll paint some vertical branches that taper to become smaller at the top. You can even have a few branches near the ground on the right. Now let's make a selection from that layer and create a new color layer above it to tint on. I'll select the digital airbrush G, set to default, and I'll use a desaturated red-violet color and fade it down to a desaturated indigo. I'll hide the tree so you can see what I'm doing. Then I'll merge the two layers, enable preserve transparency, deselect the selection, set the digital airbrush G to screen, and lighten the layer a bit. Make it fade slightly from light on top to dark on bottom. The value should be just slightly darker than the sky color so that it just becomes part of the background. I won't lighten the branches near the ground on the right. Next, switch to the linear size P angle B color brush, and on a new layer, I'll disable preserve transparency, and I'll use some lighter and darker indigo colors to create more vertical features in the background. Now it looks like there are many more trees back there. I'll merge those two layers and name it Trees Fill. I'll show the foreground trees again. The bush is unfinished, so let's add some detail to it. I'll add a new layer beneath the bush grass layer, and I'll continue using the linear size P angle B color brush and the far twigs nozzle. I'll paint with the light snow color first, then I'll go over it with some of the indigo shadow colors, and some grays and browns from the bush. Switch back to your main color, enable preserve transparency, and use the digital airbrush G with the multiply mode to tint the right side blue so it appears in shadow. Name this layer Bush Frost and disable preserve transparency. You may want to darken behind the frost to make it stand out more. Do this on a multiply layer beneath the bush frost using the sponge and a dark brown color. I'll name the layer Bush Inner Shadow. Next, we'll finish up some of the shoreline and stream details. I'll add a new multiply layer beneath the Land FG Left layer called Shoreline Dark. First, select the digital airbrush G with the multiply mode and sample one of the indigo colors from the water. Paint with the edges of a small brush to create a feathered gradient where the land touches the water. This should be subtle. Then use a smaller brush to paint horizontal strokes that make the water look rippled. Some areas of the shoreline can be darker than others. Because of the way the layers are stacked up, you will overpaint onto the shoreline in the background. Use the eraser to clean this up. You may want to reduce the opacity of this layer if it is too strong. Next, I will make a selection of the land FG left, and I will create 2 new layers beneath the bush called Edge Shadow and Edge Highlight. Make them multiply and screen composite methods respectively. On the shadow layer, paint along the edge of the land with an indigo shadow color with the smooth palette knife to make the edge of the land look like it drops off. Reduce the opacity of this layer to blend it until it looks closer in value to the grass shadows. Then use the eraser to make the edge facing the grass jagged. On the edge highlight layer, use a light grass color with the smooth palette knife above the shadow to enhance the contrast of the edge. Next, I'll create a thick paint layer above it called Shoreline Dirt. I'll use the broken paint flat brush and the simulated wood grain at a scale of around 200% with some dark browns and blues to make a bit of an edge where there is some dirt and deeper shadows. Reduce the opacity of this layer until it is darker than the stream, but not black. Save an iteration of your progress, and then merge all of the land FG layers together, except for the shoreline dark layer. Then use the coarse oily blender with the simulated wood grain paper at a scale of 100% to smudge the grass and shoreline edges to give the impression of grass growing out of dirt. Use this along the top edge of the grass to make it taller where it overlaps the background, and use it throughout the grass to make it taller near the shoreline. I'll enable Preserve Transparency and use the digital airbrush with the blue from the water to make some of the shadows lighter and cooler on the shoreline. The stream is looking flat, so let's add some detail to that next. With Preserve Transparency enabled, I'll use the coarse oily blender on the stream layer. Use a large brush while holding Shift to paint horizontal strokes that smudge the stream to make it look rippled. Next, I will duplicate the stream layer and disable Preserve Transparency. Then I will select the Speckle Diffuse Blur brush, and I will hold Shift and blend vertically, then horizontally to make the distant stream look iced over on the right. Leave the bottom left rippled. Maybe it's starting to melt or there are rocks in the water there. Merge the stream layers, then create a selection of the stream and hide it. I'll create 3 new layers, a multiply, a screen, and a default layer. They don't need names since they will be temporary. I'll start with the multiply layer to add some shadows to the water. I'll select the chalk brush and the ripples paper, which is in my AR papers library. Be sure the paper is angled to be perfectly horizontal. That's around 160%. I'll paint with the indigo shadow color to make some dark ripples. Pick your pen up to offset the pattern. I'll change the paper scale and add layers of ripples, but only in the bottom left where the ice is melted. Repeat this on the screen layer using a lighter indigo. It can go over on the right a bit. And then on the default layer, I'll sample colors from the nearby grass to reflect off of the ripples. You can try a tiny bit of this in the icy area, but too much might ruin the ice effect. Adjust the opacity of each layer to balance the values. The darkest stream colors should be close to the foreground chunks. When you are finished, merge those layers with the stream. With a selection of the stream, I'll create another new layer to separate the shore from the stream. Use the smooth palette knife with various environment colors to add more reflections to the water. Define the ice in the stream with a fine brush and light and dark colors. Next, add a color layer above the previous layer and use the digital airbrush to tint the lower left side of the water with one of the more cyan blue colors from the HSY gamut. Merge those layers with the stream. As you can see, some layers we will keep long term, and others we will only use for a moment. Let's create a thick paint layer and set the visible depth to around 63%. I'll deselect the active selection and use the lasso selection tool to select some of the icy areas. Then I'll use the broken paint flat brush with light pressure to paint with the snow color to create ice. Reduce the opacity of this layer until it just barely stands out. Then merge it with the stream. At this point, we have added most of the detail to this painting. Now we just need to wrap up some miscellaneous details that are scattered throughout the scene. It may be helpful to flip your canvas horizontally. This gives you a fresh view of work you have been looking at for a long time. You may even find that you prefer the composition after flipping it. That's okay. Another way flipping the canvas can be useful is to help mistakes stand out. After flipping, you may notice things you want to correct. If you do flip the canvas, be sure to remember that you will need to shade on the opposite side until you flip it back. I'll flip the canvas back. Now I'd like to finish up the grass details on the right and left. On the left, I'll make a selection of the land FG left layer. Then I'll create a multiply and screen layer above the bush group. I'll use the linear size P angle B color brush with my additional color set to grass colors and shadow colors. I'll use the far twigs nozzle to give the impression of many grass blades, but I will also use it like I did on the trees to create form on the land. Use shadows mostly near the bottom of the grass at the shoreline, and make the features smaller in the background. On the screen layer, I'm using lighter colors near the top, and finish it up with a dusting of snow color to make the grass look frosted. Adjust the opacity of these layers to blend them in. I'll group these layers into a group called Grass Right Details. While I'm in this area, I'll pop into the bush group and add a multiply layer at the top. I'll name this layer Cast Shadow, and I will use the smooth palette knife with a dark indigo color set to my main color to paint a shadow sloping down the land. Enable Preserve Transparency, and use one of the lighter browns from the tree trunks to make the right edge brighter and warmer. Then disable Preserve Transparency, and use the eraser to erase the grass blades that overlap the shadow. Next, we'll move to the grass on the right side. I'll make a selection of the land FG right layer, and create a multiply and screen layer at the top of the group. Then I'll repeat that process of using the linear size P angle B color brush with environment colors to finish up the grass. Group those layers into a Grass Right Details group, then get a selection of the grass tinting on the right, and make a multiply layer above it. Use the sponge with the default mode and a desaturated brown set to the main color to tint the grass to blend it with the taller grass. Reduce the layer opacity as needed, and name this layer Grass Tinting 2. Next, add a new layer at the top of the Grass Right Details group called Frost. Make a selection of the land FG right layer, and use the linear size P angle B color brush with the additional color set to the snow color to frost the tips of the grass. Use a larger brush for the tall grass and a smaller brush for the shorter grass. Now let's add some brighter highlights to the snow throughout the scene. I'll make a selection of the land FG right layer and create a thick paint layer above it. Then I'll use the Broken Paint flat brush with the Ripples paper to paint in some lighter and darker desaturated snow colors set to the main color. Change the paper scale and overlap several strokes to randomize the shapes. Reduce the opacity of the layer a bit and merge it down. I'll repeat this on a new thick paint layer above the distant land in the land mid group. This time use a smaller paper scale since this stuff is far away. Also add some of the base grass color so that the edge between the snow and the grass is broken up. Reduce the opacity of the layer and then merge it down. I'll use the diffuse blur brush to blur lightly near the horizon using horizontal strokes. Let's wrap up the background bushes behind the trees. This is as easy as creating a new Twigs BG layer above the bushes BG, and using the linear size P angle B color brush to paint with snow and shadow colors to imply lots of sticks growing up. Sample the darkest trunk color and use a bit of that where the trunks might cast shadows. The horizon lines are rather sharp, so let's soften them a bit so they look more distant. I'll select the distant land layer and blur it with the blur blender until the line is soft. Then enable Preserve Transparency and use a small digital airbrush to paint over the edge where it got darker using the snow color from the ground set to your main color. Next, I'll select the Hillslow front layer, and with Preserve Transparency off, I'll use the digital airbrush with the snow color to soften the edge and make it look more distant. Then go along the edge with a finer brush to break it up so it doesn't look so perfectly straight. Do the same on the hill's low back layer. Let's clean up the tree line in the distance. I'll add more foliage and frost on a thick paint layer at the top of the hill's BG group. We'll name this layer Tree Line Details. I'll use the broken paint flat brush, the simulated wood grain paper, and lighter colors to paint on the lighter trees. I'll add 25% visible depth to make the leaves stand out. I'm using the art pen to rotate the dab so the details are fuller on the light side. Reduce the opacity of that layer to blend the colors together if they're too strong. Next, I'll add a new layer for evergreen details. Then I'll use the linear size P color brush with the fan dabs nozzle and a light indigo to tap in a few frosty areas on the leaves. Reduce the layer opacity, and then enable preserve transparency. Toggle to your main color, and select the digital airbrush to tint the bottom to make it appear in shadow using the blue from the top of the sky made a bit darker. After that, you may find that the tree line is too light. You may want to lighten the sky a bit by adjusting the colors with the filter. Let's also add some flavor to the top of the sky by tinting it a more cyan blue from the HSI gamut using the digital airbrush on a color layer with preserve transparency disabled. Merge it with the sky when you're done. I'll make a selection of the land mid group and add 2 new layers at the top of the group. These will be called Lighten and Darken, and they will be Screen and Multiply layers respectively. I'll use one of the middle cyan colors from the HSY gamut and the digital airbrush to lighten and tint the top of the tree line on the left side. The right side is closer to the foreground, so I'll lighten the base of the plane instead. Use a smaller brush to lighten along the distant horizon as well. Next, I will use the Darken layer to paint with one of the desaturated grass colors over the lighter trees to make them slightly darker than the sky surrounding them. Use a bit of the sky color on the shadow side of these trees. Reduce the opacity of these layers to blend them in. The sky should be the lightest compared to the tree line. Deselect the selection when you are finished. In the next video, we will wrap up the bulk of the remaining details, starting with the foreground trees.